And tonight we have an additional Monday night lecture series, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome Ana Maria Tavares. And this evening actually is sponsored by MIT's Artist in Residency program. Thanks Michelle, for making this possible. And Anna is actually here for the third time on campus. And in the meantime, also some of our students have been visiting Sao Paulo, her resident city. So it's really, in many senses, very great to have you back here and also to talk again to our audience. Actually, Ana is born in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, and she is based in Sao Paulo, where she's also teaching at the university. She studied at the Art Institute of Chicago and has a PhD from the University of Sao Paulo. She has been awarded quite a number of prizes, amongst them the John Simon grant from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. And as I said already, she was the Eli Rubin Artist in Residence at this institute, and this is kind of ongoing research time slots, and it's amazing what the MIT Artist in Residency programs do. They actually connect artists who are in residency here to many different units, to many different programs in order to support also the research of the artists. I think Ana Maria will talk tonight about lost landscapes, and in very short we will know what she meant by that. And I think it will be a very interesting additional part of our lecture series this term, and thanks again for doing that, and let us welcome Ana Maria Tavares.
Thank you. Well, good evening, thanks for coming, and I see faces that I saw last time I was here on my lecture, so I thank you for coming back again to look at the work. And I have this video. It's one of my most recent pieces that I made. I just decided to show it before I started the presentation because I'm going to give you a little history of the work and how I started and the main points that I find relevant for the things that I've been trying to discuss. This is a 3D animation, and it was made out of a project that I made for Japan that never worked out. And I found that I wanted to create this kind of fictional ambience, more like a floating world, underground, underwater, I guess. And you see a relation with past works that I made. It's a silent piece, and it's now being shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tokyo in a very large projection, 12 meters by 6. And it has this, I really like works that are total experience in space, so this idea of immersion, of this very floating kind of unstable territory. So it's 20 minutes long, so it goes on and on, moving around different scenes of this space. So now, Dan, can you help me out here? Yeah. You can hear when Oh, there it is. Well, I'll first go very quickly here to show you what I was doing in Chicago. And when I started my MFA, I was making drawing installations. And the idea that's very important to me at this time was that I really have always liked to work in a scale that has a confrontation with the body. So this idea of immersion has been very important to me since then. So the drawings were installations that I would make layers and layers of lines and create this kind of situation where the image was not fixed and the idea of time and movement was always there. So this idea of dislocation, of not having anything fixed in space was the main goal. So I did that for a while, and then when I went back to Brazil in '87, I had a big project at the Biennial where I built 250 square meters out of bricks and tiles, making a very huge gridded space, and the piece was called Two Nights of Sun, and it was the first time that I ever thought of the viewer as a passenger, and the work as a journey. And it was this relation with day and night, and I wanted this very cold space in a pattern like a grid, and with these very central lines that crossed all over the space. So the idea was that the viewer would go from that door on the back, across this first piece called Harp, and immerse through this drawing-like space. So at that time, I guess the space and the experience in space and the idea of developing time was very important, but it was also very subjective. And I think that from that on, there was a great shift in the work. And this is the last room with a sphere, and it's all made with glass. It's like 16,000 of glass pieces, 10 by 5. It's all the structure is also glass, and it has light inside. So on the last room, you're facing this huge ball sphere that was very transparent. And the great shift, I think, from then on was the fact that I was thinking about drawing and what it meant, and I guess the important shift was from drawing to design. And I started to observe that everybody I started to observe architecture in general and how, especially public spaces, had a lot of structures that were made for the body, like to rest the body or to help the body move. So looking at architecture, I decided to make pieces that would hold the body in a certain way that would be like a demarcation, or say this is the domain of the viewer and the art is there. So establishing these two kinds of time relation of the work and what you do in space. So that piece is a central piece called Those in Flight, and it was placed in an installation with many other works around. And again, I think that even there was this relationship with looking, how you look and where do you look from. So the work became a platform to look at different places from a distance. So this idea of observation and the possibility of a critical observation of what's on the other side started then. So later on, investing in this idea of the object in its function, and looking at public spaces and how it's filled with what I started to call processes of architecture. I started to, inspired by these elements in architecture, I started to make these objects or these structures which were not exactly like them, or they were not ready-mades, but they were inspired in this idea of movement, of the public spaces of transit. So what I did, I started to make them as pieces that were shown in art spaces like a gallery. But I think that what's important at this time was the fact that I was looking at the functionality, but I was always trying to emphasize this idea of a functionless object. So by removing it from its own context, I was not taking the context in. This idea of what do you do with this that is very familiar was totally erased. And I think that it interested me to have this kind of disturbing experience in terms of what you do in real space, in public space, or in daily life, that you move around as an expert. And then when you remove this to an art space, this whole context also shifts your way of thinking and how you approach the object. I think it's funny that at the time I was making little drawings like this. Later I totally started to work on computer and computer-generated images. So I think that a big shift was to me when I was invited to do this exhibition at Pampulha, which is in Belo Horizonte. Belo Horizonte is the town where I was born, and it's also the place where Niemeyer had his first project, developed his first project. Belo Horizonte, this is an artificial lake. This is called Pampulha. And I may say that Belo Horizonte is the first planned city in Brazil. It's based on a French, the model of Paris, and it's a neoclassic kind of style. And the mayor of the city in the 40s was Juscelino Kubitschek, and at the time he wanted to make a big project in this area of town, and so he invited a French architect to come to Brazil, to come to Belo Horizonte and propose a project. And as he understood, Belo Horizonte was growing and there were a lot of industry and there was a boom and the working class was growing, and he proposed to make urban housings for the working class. But Juscelino at the time, he needed a project to get the support of the rich people, the bourgeoisie. So he just sent the architect away and invited Niemeyer to build a project for Pampulha. And Niemeyer then, he decided to, it was a swamp area, and he decided to build this artificial lake. And around the artificial lake there were 4 or 5 buildings. The yacht club here, this is the place where we're looking, the casino. The church is on the right, and the ballroom is around there. So, yeah, right there. Can't see it very well. But anyhow, then it became, this is the church, the little church, right there, the round. What happened was that, of course, at the beginning this whole project was inaugurated, but it was a big failure, because the church never approved this modernist church, so it wasn't used. The casinos were forbidden 2 or 3 years after the project was inaugurated. The dam never really worked, and the yacht club became a place that was not so used, because in Minas, as we're inland, we're not on the coast, Mineiros really don't know how to deal with water. So what I find interesting is that this is the first project. It did work for some time, but it wasn't, at the time, it wasn't like Juscelino expected. But what's very important that it shaped the idea of future of Brazil. And from then, Juscelino was elected president, and he built Brasilia with Niemeyer and Lúcio Costa. So to me, what was interesting here is to deal with this idea of the future of the country, and how, in a way, there was this idea of glamorous future and a positive and optimistic idea of a big country developing itself and placing itself in the world, with this project of modernization that was started then by Juscelino Kubitschek. So architecture and politics were together then. And what I find interesting, there are many very interesting things to observe in this place. First is the experience, the mirroring experience, as I call it. The building, the casino, which became a museum in the 70s. It's a very interesting interior. And I may say that Minas Gerais is also the place where the Baroque developed in the colonial period. It's a mountain state, and in Ouro Preto, Mariana, and other cities, it's where the gold mines were, and precious stones. So it had a big development in terms of architecture and city planning in a way. And I think that's very interesting to take this Niemeyer project as its most Baroque modernist architecture. And you can see with the reflections and the reverberation of the outside in the inside, it's all glass, all around is glass, it's round. And To me, in the 40s, he was, in a way, announcing the idea of seduction that we use a lot in shopping centers. So when I look at this project, I see all these these materials being used, and the reflections and how everything reverberates in itself again and again through the mirror. This is a huge mirror wall, and then you enter from that side, and then you are in this environment. And I think the mirror wall in Nehemiah is, to me, the synthesis of his architecture. To look at the mirror, and I think that this experience, in a way, is a synthesis of the idea of future. So with this element that I've appropriated and named Nehemiah Wall, I have tried to discuss about what is the idea of future that we have ahead of us. And I think that's very interesting how Nehemiah places the mirror. This is in Brasilia. You go up a ramp, and then you're facing this swirling ramp, and on the back there is a mirror again. So the minute you go up the ramp outside the building and enter the building, you're facing with the outside. So the landscape goes in there immediately, and you're facing with this empty and almost abyssal landscape. And so what I did for this exhibition first, I wanted to make it become a non-space. I wanted to create a shift that would turn this museum, casino museum space into a space of transit. So I called it Pampulha Port. And the Pampulha is right next to the airport. So there's this implicit idea of delight, of conquering, this beautiful world. And I think that the ideas that are very connected to Brazilian modernism were really stopped by dictatorship right afterwards. So I think that it's very important it was important to take this idea of this glamorous space and turn this in almost public space, empty space, and create objects that would be seen as protheses of this architecture, but at the same time mimetized in space. So you wouldn't realize that they were actual artworks, but you would be just using it with its function, and then finding a way through the space as if it were another space. So the main idea was to remove all the museum structures that were placed there. I guess it's also related to an institutional critique in a way, because the museum was striving to have its life, and there were all kinds of walls and panels and support structures for art pieces. And what I did, I removed everything, and I emptied out the whole space, creating the situation that was related to the landscape. And around the whole project was done with Burlemax. So what you see is this beautiful landscape, and this piece, it's very important because it relates to this idea of vertigo, of losing yourself, and reflects the landscape through the mirrors, the surveillance mirrors that were placed on the columns. So you could see the landscape reverberating all the time in different places. And the most important, the key piece for this work was a car that people could drive in a very slow motion, and there was a sound piece that was made with lounge music and sounds from airports and different spaces. So the idea of landscape here was connected to the idea of the landscape of the memory, and how you build up this kind of feeling that is, in a way, pretty much what the whole project meant, projecting Brazil to the future. So I think that I grew up in a time where Brazil was this sleeping giant, and this idea of a better future and a greater nation was all there. And so I'm trying to explore this with the work to at least to make one become more critical in relation to this. So this is the little car. It's called Guided Tour with J9. And so this lighting, as if you were in a documentary, totally displaced from time, real time, was really what I wanted, to extend time by creating this situation where you're almost numb and you float in this landscape of this artificial landscape of the architecture. And the architecture is almost like a machine to see what's outside. So these were the elements, like the column with the seat is called elevator seat, the handles, the turnstile, and all you could see is the architecture. So it's also related to a critique to the president of the Biennial, who was always driving on a VIP car, only for the VIPs, and in a golf car inside the Biennale pavilion. And so I made this piece for everyone, that they could empower themselves and float in this kind of landscape. I'll go on here to show you. A little bit more. Next, this is the front of the museum. What I did was I took this exhibition to São Paulo, to a building by Paulo Mendes da Rocha. And Paulo Mendes da Rocha is also an architect, is a follower of Niemeyer, has great architecture. And he built a museum in São Paulo called MUBI. And contrary to Niemeyer, he built this underground museum. And as you enter, you have to go down. So the ramp is, there's a ramp that you have to go down inside. And there's no connection to real life. So I was interested, what I wanted to do was to create the relationship of these two museums with such a different kind of architecture. One's facing real world and real time, and with this gorgeous landscape. And Paulo Mendes da Rocha makes you drown inside. So I made then what I call facsimiles of some elements of the Niemeyer architecture, like the columns there and the Niemeyer wall. And I placed that inside Paulo Mendes da Rocha. And by shifting these elements from Niemeyer's architecture into Paulo Mendes da Rocha, and with all these elements of public space, the space became empty, but yet it looked like a huge station. And the title of this piece, this work, was Relaxo Visions. So creating a contrast between this idea that in one place you have this beautiful landscape and all these memories, all these landscapes that were created, like the memory and the sound landscape, inside this huge museum with the surveillance mirrors. It also was asking lots of questions about museum practice and the fact that this museum has been a big failure in terms of its own project. It doesn't work, there's bad administration. So in a way the work was claiming the status, what was the status of this place. I didn't have the little car here. I wanted to create a different relation to how you move around. And what was interesting is that the ramp was really long, and you would dive into the mirror reflecting the whole environment on the back of the mirrors. And it was very disturbing in a way, because you knew all these elements, like they in a way made sense to be together, but there was such a great removal of the context. So it looked like a station, but it wasn't. And the question what you do and how you react in a place like this, that you're so familiar, but there's something missing. That I like the idea that these environments ended up looking more like still life. And following on that same idea, Nehemiah Wall has been placed in different situations. For example, when I made Exit 2, and it's a piece that I like a lot because in a way it's related to the feeling of living in São Paulo, a city with 20 million people, and where you're always trapped. And so I did a sound piece. I got the recordings of a radio station, because there are a lot of helicopters in São Paulo in the rush hours, and rich people fly on helicopters to go home, and then we are always trapped in the traffic jam. It's huge traffic jam, so you have to roll out the windows, because you should not be driving with the windows down. It's not safe, and you're totally trapped. So all you can do is to listen to the station and try to figure out which is the best way to get out. So when I made Exit, I was thinking about creating this kind of landscape that is on your memory, and it's very, in a way, also it tries to help you to get on your way and to get out of the mess of the city, but at the same time you cannot do anything. So by recreating the image of the city in a trapped kind of situation, Exit is no exit. And also there are some tricks in terms of the work, because it's based on, inspired by airport stairways, the ones that lead you to airports, to planes. And in this piece here, for example, what I did, instead of having the Nehemiah Wall in one side, it's like octagonal shape. I had mirrors all over. And what happens is that when you go up, you're like 4 meters high, and you have a vision to the mirrors. And and the sound piece with this kind of new age kind of soul music. So this is gambling also with a mirror on this huge theater. And then it was an inspiration for this piece here that I did in Holland. And again, it's called Middelburg Airport Lounge with Parede Niemeyer. And that's 2001. So by creating this reflection panels and placing them on different places, like the entrance, as you see, you can enter from there or the other side. That's a huge Nehemiah Wall. And on the other extreme, there's a video, which is an animation video. People would go in from the sides. And I think that I wanted to create this kind of intense situation and feeling we have when we are in this kind of space like an airport. And even so now, I think now even more we are threatened by this kind of tension of spaces like an airport. And so at the Fleischhall Wall, I wanted to do was to mix, to create this kind of landscape of the architecture and also introduce this other more fictional with a 3D animation, which is a very simple kind of situation. It's just an escalator. You go down on an escalator and end up on this huge plaza with a labyrinth. And as you entered, after the turnstile, you could pick up headphones and wander around listening to the airport piece, and with lounge music, and also there was this other sound piece of the video, and so everything was again projected inside the other mirror panels. I really like to think that the pieces are very mobile. I like that. I've been combining these pieces in many different installations, and they get a different role and become something else depending on the architecture. And this is a place in Holland, it's a medieval architecture, and I really like that combination of a very contemporary environment with harsh stainless steel. Okay. I've also used I've collected words and expressions which in a way reflect the idea of pleasure, and they're simply expressions that we use in daily life to express in a way things that makes us feel good, but they're all illusions. So in Cuba, I did a piece called Visiones Sedantes, which is the translation of relaxo visions, adding another meaning, which is the idea of sedatives. Sedantes means to sedate. So Visiones Sedantes was, in a way, how I saw what was happening in Cuba at that time. I like to think of this work as a filmic experience because I created a lounge inside this gallery that belonged to the public library, and in a way this work was a place to see the book dealing outside, as we were in the library and there were no books and no water and no life almost, and life was happening outside and the books were just going away, being sold to the tourists. Visiones Sedantes was also a place to discuss this, the tense situation of the Cubans at the time, and it was a lounge with a piano and flowers that were changed every day. I made this piece in São Paulo again at Paulista Avenue with the same intention, creating this kind of environment that is totally like we know or we could predict to be a lounge of airport or a waiting room or a concert hall, but with no life. So reality outside is like a movie, and you sit there and there's nothing to do, nothing is going to happen, and reality is almost frozen. So this idea of displacement and delay of time, again, happens in a way that you can see outside, you can see the world outside, and from this removed perspective. Skip that. Just want to show the inside. So you could see both Paulista Avenue and its reflection on the mirror inside. Okay. Another piece that was done later. Music is going on, but it shouldn't. It's called Cityscape, which is a fake architectural facade. It's 20 meters long, and I developed a technique of coloring and engraving in stainless steel, which is related to the idea of illusion too. I like that very much because the words are engraved, but it's a result of changing the particles of the steel, and so light travels and the refraction, you have two beams, and so it becomes a different color. I would like to stop this sound, but keep it down. Yeah. So Cityscape was this huge wall facing Niemeyer Park, Ibirapuera Park, and the city projected itself in this mirror, and also there were words written, which is the collection of words and expressions that I have, which is credit card, relaxo visions, visiones sedantes, sparkling water, and all this is, you can read that if there is light, and it's very hard to photograph because the words appear and disappear. And all of a sudden you have the whole city reflected, and these words are floating on this surface of the steel. And I like that because you could see the city projected in there, and it was, in a way, all these words are critique to the way we move today and how we need these pressure relievers in our lives, but they only create illusions and not really fulfill your needs. So in a way I can say that this is my answer to the Niemeyer wall. This is the work that I made that I think that respond to the utopian ideas of Niemeyer and the mirror wall. The fact that we have to be, in a way, more critical about it. I also want to talk about these platforms that Niemeyer is also making all the time to distance you, to remove you from reality and look at things from a distance. And for that I have been using the stairways and the pathways many times. In this public art project in São Paulo, I was invited to make an intervention on this old building. This is an old photograph of the city on this abandoned building. And the inspiration was this spiral stairway on the outside, and the fact that the tower was so big and totally abandoned for so many years, for 20 years. And I recreated a path throughout the building that, in a way, would take you from one place to another in this journey around the building with a very non-functional kind of stairway. But I really wanted to decelerate time, to make people float on this abandoned building from one floor to another, creating this circuit that was almost as obsolete as the whole building. So it was all made out of steel, and the platform, I used steel mesh, so it would be soft, so that people wouldn't really rush through it. So I really wanted people to have this delayed time to see the architecture and the architectural landscape. When I visited the space for the first time with the curator, I really thought of Piranesi's engravings and the Cáceres series. And I was thinking about this relation of past and future and this numbing of the present. So I really like this idea of creating something that could simply be there and be, in a way, it could look just like the place and its age, and at the same time be this platform to go through it. To navigate through it. Okay, I'll go on. And then in Singapore, I did this piece that was in the middle of the busy city center, and all the works were supposed to be in temples for this biennial, and I really felt I didn't want to be in any temple because all I wanted was to create this maze so people could be looking at the city, the busy city movement from this removed platform. And also the fact that this huge construction structure that was spread all over the city on the construction of new buildings was just laying there for nothing. And this whole pathway was high enough so you could be almost close to the treetops of the city. And I felt that for the Singaporeans, the landscape was like a postcard, and that it was hard for them to relate to it the way, at least the way we tried to do. And also I made this installation in a gallery space with other works. But here I really wanted to work out the scale of this construction site inside the building and almost compressing the whole architecture and the works. It was great that I could do it with other artists. And so this is the video I showed you before. And in 2004 I made this installation inspired by the films that I was able to work with. It was shot by a merchant captain that would go from Hamburg to Buenos Aires. And I think that what struck me when I saw this film first was the caption of all these big machines, like the ship and the Zeppelin. And also, I was very struck by the idea, and I kept thinking, what was the idea of future they had then, and what is the relation, and the tense and intense relation in terms of territories that we have now. So I made this installation in São Paulo. It was I made this checked floor with seats that are used in traveling buses. Night buses in Brazil. We have a lot of night buses. So I went to this company and I built these chairs, very comfortable chairs, and the piece is called Enigmas of One Night. And I edited the film in 2 screens, so the projection would be constantly repeating itself. And on the other side of the projection there was this huge mirror wall. And I think that in this work the relation of past and future was very intense, and the suspension of present time. Suspended, I guess. I used a sound piece. I collected also recordings from the stock exchange market, and I distorted and worked it out on the computer, so it would become this very numbing kind of sound that's also related to the idea of this dream-like landscape. This is a little bit of the film that you can see. It's beautiful silver film, old. And the images of the sea were so impressive that I felt that I wanted to make this very large horizon and transform this space into this almost vertical kind of experience. And so you needed a support for your body. That's why I made the chairs. And so images of this huge ship and the Zeppelin meeting each other on the sea. What I did with the footage was that I removed all traces of cities and real spaces that you could recognize. So the whole trip is on this ship lost in the ocean and the Zeppelin on the sky. And you see some people, but there's always a very tense kind of situation happening between them. There are times when they start to play in the ship. There are always these parties. So I cut a lot. I edited in a way that all the relationship that went on was very intense and very tense, and it started with a play and became almost like a fight. And I did that by playing with the time of the video, by extending and making it more slow motion almost, and fading into white again of the foam of the sea. There were very strange scenes of people, like when they all dressed up to play like with the Santa Claus, but it looked really intense and scary in a way. So I explored this a lot in the film. Okay, this is a series of works I did right after this exhibition, and it's called Paradise, the Island Men, and it's a montage, a collage with 3D drawings like this whole architectural building and these landscapes that refer to old lost landscapes like the ones that we saw in the film. They were all taken by this captain, and there were beautiful images, footage of the ship entering Rio de Janeiro, but I decided not to use them for the film because I really didn't want to have a place. And this is an experiment I did. I was trying to make this still image with a movement, a very slow, kind of strange landscape movement. And this is a very recent piece I did just now in an exhibition in São Paulo, and it's called Vitrine from the Lost Landscape series. And I think that I have been looking a lot at Lina Bobardi's work now. She's also a Brazilian architect. She immigrated from Italy and became a Brazilian in '51. She was born in 1914, died in 1992 at 78 years old. And I really think that the idea of looking into Lina Bobardi has come as an answer to all the kind of utopian possibilities set out by Niemeyer. She's a great architect that has developed a work related much more to understanding the relation with the context, trying to bring into her work the heritage of Brazil, mixing pop culture with high culture. She did great projects in Bahia. She did a whole project that was never realized during the military period. She had to flee from Bahia, and she wanted to work with the heritage of the African heritage in Bahia. And she did lots of works that really tried to put together the community and work with this idea of the landscape that is inclusive and more anthropological in terms of its relation with man and real people. And I was looking at her museum pieces, museum furniture that she made for MASP. She built this museum in São Paulo, and I came up with this piece that's called Lost Landscape, where I present some images of a real landscape and enclosed and in a way as a reversal of her glass house. And this is the glass house when she projected. It's her house in this beautiful neighborhood that was then a farm. She's inside the house, and it's now all taken over by nature and totally covered by this natural forest. And I'll stop here, I think. I have more works that I could present, but maybe we have some time to talk. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Shall we put up some light in the back?
Tavares?
Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. And I think it's very interesting because today with like one of the classes that are here, we talked about like the heterotopia and like you brought up like the mirror, like in the boat as the ultimate heterotopia that drives on and is a capsule of time and place and never really arrives. But what is more stunning to me is also that like you introduce something that Marc Auger would declare as like the non-site, the spaces of transition, the lounge, the waiting room, the airport. Like it's this kind of cool places that are detached basically from their physical kind of sides. And I mean, can you say a little bit like what really triggers you?
Well, I started to read Marc Auger in '95, and I was really struck by what he wrote, because that was exactly what I was feeling and how my senses were, you know, like intuitively I was exactly looking at these spaces. And I think that I started to do that by looking at Niemeyer, because I think that the casino is such a great project, and it seems to me that everything is there. For example, when I transformed the casino into a non-place, a station, totally empty. As you could see, most of my pictures are empty. There's no people in it. And even if there are people in these places, there's this very strong abyssal kind of experience. I don't know if that word is okay in English, but the idea of an abyss, that you fall in and you're left with no ground, is to me what Niemeyer does to us. I mean, at least how it's not, maybe I should say that I think that one thing is the architectural project and its ideologies, and what becomes of it, the practiced space, is much more. So I think Niemeyer brings to Brazilians this idea of an utopian world, of the great future that is to come. So I like to say this sentence that I have used a lot is, we have left, but we have not yet arrived. So where are we looking at? How do we look at the mirror? And why? And what are other perspectives? So I think that in Niemeyer and at the casino, all these ideas came to my mind. Also, when I made the audio piece, it was so strange because while you drove the little car, it was such a removal that it made us, and myself even, very nervous. Because you could see reality, you could see architecture, you could see the landscape, but what you had on your mind was this glamorous kind of ambience of an airport. And so I started to think what it means to travel. How empowered are we when we talk about traveling? And right after that, that was '97, and right after that, we saw a great change in terms of the relation of territories, or these spaces that are not a territory, but like an airport, you know, like how intense it is. For example, the piece I made in Middelburg was 2 months before 9/11, and there was such a tension there. It was amazing to me that all my feelings related to how I felt in airports, or this idea of future, to me was a big failure already. And with Marc Auger, I think that I started, it was a big present to me. And I think that one of the critiques I got from the university when I had my PhD was that I was not citing art, and I was not talking about the Duchamp. And I think I'm talking about the Duchamp in many ways, or art history. But what I was interested in was to really observe how we move and the tensions in contemporary life. How are they built up, and what do we do with it? And so I guess the Cityscape project, where I wrote all these words in a way, was to make one become more conscious. So I like to think that maybe the work can raise consciousness in terms of how we move about and what we do, especially for us in Brazil. And that's why I've been looking at Lina Bobbart.
to come back like to Marco Schemann, like what he described in these places, like the lounges and like the what you also have like with the nightliners here, like it's usually first class travel. It's like those who can afford to be in these cool places, to detach themselves from reality.
Well,
and
the
to look
Zeppelin,
out.
only very rich people could fly, right?
Like and what you mentioned with the helicopter, so I think it also like brings in a strong notion of class, like who basically can even afford to detach. Many people can't. I think like this what you say on the one side, like with Cuba, there's like this lounge you can look out on the one side, but like people on the other side cannot detach there. So I was curious, like how do you link that in terms of like, I mean, the non-side is a very attractive space because it's also you leave responsibilities behind, like you can basically like check yourself out into that places, these very cool places. So, but how do you position yourself in relation to that?
Well, it was interesting in Cuba because the work was always packed. A lot of people came in, and the Cubans were there observing themselves. So I agree. For example, the car that you could drive with the sound, as I said, I like to think that anyone can drive it, and it's available for everyone. As the VIP card that the president of the biennial had, only the VIPs could really use it. So the idea of empowering the other in that sense is very important, because it's available, it's for everyone, not only the VIPs. And of course, there's a lot of, I at least think that it's a critique about this class issue in terms of who can and who cannot. And all the time in the work you get that. For example, the Zeppelin only these people, rich people could fly on a Zeppelin. And on the ship, these people were looking to see this big thing flying. And so there's almost this idea of who is where, and how you see what's available and what's not available.
I'm sure like there's also quite a number of people maybe here who also have questions. Yeah.
In a lot of the pieces, there are themes that are detachment, sedation, being lost. And I was just wondering, in working on these, did you get a sense of how to do sort of opposite feelings of engagement?
I don't think I hear you. Could you say it again?
I'm sorry. I was saying that in the pieces, there's a lot of sort of negative, tense feelings of detachment, sedation, being lost. And I was just wondering if, through the experience of making these works, you were able to sort of understand something about the opposite feelings of engagement.
If I have been able to?
To learn something about designing spaces that are positive.
About what? Sorry, I should see you.
Designing spaces that are positively engaging.
Desired spaces?
Designing spaces.
Design spaces that are positive. Good question. I think that it's not a matter of saying design is bad or good, or but I always thought, I suppose I talk about the controlled spaces, the design and the construction of controlled spaces. And I think most of the time it is, in a way, controlling how you move and what you do. And sometimes I think that there's no way out. I mean, the more it's comfortable and you desire it, you wish to have it because it makes life easier. But in a way, they do control one's life. And but also, not only that, I think that there are a lot of contents behind a design space. And I mean, it all depends on the context. For example, when I see Niemeyer's work, of course, And as a whole, I think it's great, but I also don't think that it's detached from its political agenda. Even though, of course, I can say Niemeyer is a communist, and he was thinking of these places, and he has his political agenda too, but at the end, it served bourgeoisie class, and it served to place Brazil in the world in terms of looking how well and how good Brazil looked and could present itself to the world. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You know, you got me thinking that the type of lounges that you're showing, I don't think you would find something like that 100 years ago. And if you go to, for example, South Station in Boston, which is a train station, or Union Station in Washington, D.C., or Grand Central in New York, there are these big, grand buildings that people would go in, and they probably wouldn't feel that abyssal feeling that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And you know, you mentioned the Zeppelins, and I think that, and maybe some of these passenger liners, and I guess you would start to get that. It just struck me, it's interesting, when did that start to happen? And it's not something that seems to always have been there, and you can't even go back too far, because if you keep going back further and imagine travel 200 years ago, you probably don't have anything like that. You know, you just have, I guess, ships or caravans or something like that, and it's a completely different mode. I guess you wouldn't have these lost spaces. So I think it's interesting point that you're making there. And I'm just trying to come to grips with how this all evolved.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very recent, and it's very interesting to go to places where design hasn't yet arrived. I went to Colombia, for example, last year, and I was so happy in a way to see the mess, not, you know, the unorganized but very organic and fluid kind of organization. And then now they're starting to have this kind of design stations and more planned public transportation, and they all look the same. It's a pattern that's repeated, and in a way it flattens your imagination, and that's very striking, and it's very scary to me, at least, that somehow maybe Latin American culture has invented other ways to go against the flow. For example, they have cell phones, but it's amazing to see how the practice, how it happens. You go to the streets, and these guys open up their suits, and they have tons of cell phones hanging on strings, and they announce it on the streets. And nobody that I met, not even one student or even university teachers, use their own phones to make calls. Why? Because these guys pay huge plans, you know, and so they get cheaper rates for phone calls. So you don't use your phone call to make a call, you use your phone call to receive a call, but you call from these guys on the street who are selling their cell phones for much cheaper than the companies are selling to you. So I find it amazing that in some places like Brazil or Colombia or South American places, they're subverting the system in a way that it's become hilarious to think. You know, this guy walking with cell phone. I forgot how they say. There's a word that in Spanish that they say, and they keep saying it like a mantra. So you hear this all around town, and also they have little booths in town. Every little shopping, you can go in to make a call. So I would make calls to Brazil, so cheap. My parents would say, no, don't call, it's expensive to call. And I was laughing because it's really, really cheap. So I think that's amazing when, I don't know, of course we love design, but it's amazing to see how there are other ways to make it work. And then I keep asking myself, why do we need so much, you know? And that's the feeling I had in Cuba, that's the feeling I had in Colombia. Sometimes that's the feeling I have in Brazil. And the world structured as it is sometimes is so much, you know. So I like to go back to Brazil and see that the trees break the sidewalk, and there's no way to keep them from doing it. But if you go to Singapore, which has the same landscape as Brazil, tropical landscape, the trees are perfectly designed. They don't break the floor, and they grow on a very nice pattern. So it's striking to me how one culture can perceive the landscape or the world, you know, the need to control everything. It's so amazing that sometimes I just think we have to stop and think about it. Maybe not a nice thing to say on a design place, an architecture place. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of talk about self-organization, so I think it's not exactly wrong here.
Yeah.
Coming from the woodwork, there's the first project that you showed with the lines, or maybe not the first project, but the lines in the room, seemed that you were exploring movement in relationship to person, right? Sort of like a phenomenological embodiment of movement, and you have kind of one gesture, and then you have more of a erratic gesture, and then something that is more super stable, like this ball and this moment of tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really interesting how this evolves into something about a more specific tension, and you start, you know, not using abstract ideas of movement, but more like ideas of stability, and then this turns into something about publicness, right? This turns almost like political or sociological.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering, like, in that first project, did you have an idea of movement? I mean, is this idea of movement carried through? Is it sociological from the beginning on, or is this an evolutionary?
Well, I was 24 years old. I was in Chicago, and I left Brazil to do my MFA. And I was dying to understand more about the work and try to understand also what I was talking about. And there was in the sculpture department making this huge performance by myself, to myself, making these huge drawings taken all over the walls. And I even had to build up the walls up to the ceiling because I want to cover them all with this. It was very compulsive. And I knew that I had this idea that to me life was very temporary, ephemeral, and it's time passing. And so these ideas were what made me work this way, and I really wanted this relation with very strong impact with the body also. And I also didn't want to make any specific image. I wanted you to look at the drawing and think that it was moving, and maybe if you turn back and look again, it would be different. So the idea of movement, of passage, was there since the beginning, but it's related to the way I perceive time and space, and I think it's all about movement. And there's nothing in total silence or total, fixed. And so this idea led me to, it was maybe looking to myself and then looking to the world. Like, almost as a metaphor, I could say that I, instead of placing the mirror towards myself, I did this so I could see better. And of course, it took a long time to get to that. It was 84 that I was doing this, 85, 86, 87 I made the installation at the biennial. I was totally crazy. Everybody thought I was crazy. I raised $60,000 by myself to do this with an engineer. And at the end, now I think that in that installation, the viewer was already in a journey. Because the title is 2 Nights of Sun, and it relates day and night, and he had to move around. So this idea of continuous movement has always been in my mind. But with time, I started to look how fast things move, and that we sometimes miss a lot by this very, the movement, the quick movement. And so I started to de-accelerate time, trying to push it back, to delay, to make a suspension and create a suspension in relation to present, past, and future. And I think that in '95 was my first experience with the internet, and that was very important. And actually, this idea of transporting yourself to the future, that the internet almost, now we don't perceive this anymore. It's so common that we are connected all the time. But to me, '95 was, what's happening? It's like I can be there, So I am in a place that I'm not, so it's like the experience of a mirror. So I think that all these things and the perception of how we could be displaced to different places in such a quick time was also very important.
Is that the time at which you changed your installation from, is that the time at which you changed your installation from kind of a static inhabitation to a dynamic thing, where you introduced video? Is this internet kind of linked with that?
Maybe I have to give you a little insight here. When I was making this, and when I finished this biennial, it was to me a nightmare. 2 nights of sun was a big nightmare. First, I had just arrived from Chicago. I did this piece by myself. I worked 12 years without a gallery, and people thought I was crazy to build this place. I did too at a certain point, because it was big and too big. But I felt that that was very subjective, and that I wanted to connect to something else, not my own personal subjectivity. So I pushed really hard first to try to make an autonomous piece, because till then I could only make installations. Everything I thought was for a certain space or related to space, and it was more phenomenological, like you said. So I was trying to think, what is drawing? What am I doing? And because I didn't want to go on and on and on making this, So then I came to design. So it was really interesting to go from drawing to design, which is more programmed. It's more related to architecture too, in terms of how you project, how you make it. And it's a totally different frame of mind when you think of design. So I think that by looking to design and function, it was very important, because then I started to think of convention. Design is a convention, and it's made for a purpose. So I started to look how people would lean on things. The body needs a rest, and so we move about, but we need a rest all the time. We need a chair. So I made this piece. I took it out, called a series of tables, which had long legs, a wheel, and something happened on eye level platform. But still was this connection to something from the real world, the wheel, but a very subjective platform with something happening like the drawings. And then I understood, hey, this is a synthesis of a space. This is also architecture. The table is an architecture. So I was getting closer and closer to the idea of function. And the first pieces were made an allusion to function, but they were not functional. But one day I had an exhibition, and I placed all these table-like sculpture pieces, and people, because the top of the table was high, people started to lean on it, and put glasses on top of it. And I was, hey, this is something. I need to go for this, So that's why that's when I started to make what I called my first design piece, this and this, so that you could lean on and not think that this is an artwork. That was the clue too, because what I felt was so interesting, how people immediately were drawn to the work and were there just using it, a functional piece, but didn't realize it was the work already. So this relation of, I started to say that I like this idea that you are the time, space of the work, inside the work and outside it. So in a way it has to do with Hélio Sica, a important Brazilian artist in the 60s and 70s that also made places for experience. But the difference, I think, is that in Hélio you are invited to dive into the experience and leave the real world. And in this space, this works, I think what I want is to raise consciousness. So that first is seduction, and you're attracted to the work because of what? Of experience, of familiarity, and you don't even think. You do exactly how you do in the subway. You use the turnstile, you don't ask how to do it, you're an expert. And you move around distracted and using everything nobody has to tell you how to do that. But here, what I wanted us to first, 2 stages. First, you are in it, you're using it, and then you say, wow, this, you become conscious of the whole structure. And I think the work gives this kind of clue so that you become conscious that it's there, why it's there. And to me, the most important is that the work starts to raise all these questions. What is the object? What is the space? Where am I?
You say how you went from two-dimensional design, drawings, and that you then jumped to design. So, having said that, I have a question now about the three-dimensional mazes, the rather large, large spaces. Was there an interim step? Did you make models at a smaller scale to check out the optimal path through this, or did you just start building?
You're talking about the video I showed?
Well, no,
the installation with the pathways in the building, the old building?
Yes.
Yes. No, never made models. I made a lot of renderings, computer renderings. I started out making a much larger set, but then I worked for a long time trying to optimize time and size, because I felt that I didn't want to be too authoritarian in a way that I would force people in such a long maze that, then it becomes claustrophobic. So I was very careful in terms of how big it should be, so you could be there for a certain time, but not be there so much that I would be imposing this and in a way creating this very uncomfortable and uncomfortable kind of journey. That was not the point. So fortunately, this project took 4 years to be realized, because the curator took 4 years to raise the money, and it was a big issue. I felt that it would never happen, and finally we made it. So I had the time to really work with architects and try to see what would be the size, the length, and the time that one would spend there and still get, this experience. Yeah. Okay.
Did you see your work relating to like Liam Gillick and other artists of the relational aesthetics?
Well, I have thought a lot about this. And of course I realize I come from a different perspective, a different generation, and I totally think that this is the way art should go, and but one cannot be I think I have to be true to the work and to my ideas and really try to think what is there that's relational, or how does it relate to social. So I think that I'm not making relational work as we see today, but I'm commenting on the social, on aspects of the social relation. For example, and I'm being critical of it, I think that in spaces like the non-places, there is a feeling that is always built up that is indifference and non-interaction, or a kind of illusionary kind of interaction in these places. And I think I'm trying to raise this as an issue, in how we are sometimes led not to build up bonding or relationships because of the way the spaces are structured. But I have had, and I had very recently, an experience that led me to this kind of relationship with a community. That was last May in an exhibition, public art exhibition in Holland called Sonsbeek. And for that exhibition, I tried to trace the lost landscape in a way by making a simple question to the citizens, and especially one community that I found later that was interested in the same issues that I was. I made a simple question: where does the water come from? And so with that question, I found out that nobody really knew or was interested, and there was little or non-information and no information in English available that really talked about the history of this park where the exhibition took place. So I worked with this community that defends the river that is in this park, and we built up this whole history traced back to the Ice Age, and translated lots of texts. And I even used a very interesting approach to find out about the water in the place, which was used in the Middle Ages, which is the pendulum measuring of the magnetic fields of the land. And that's how they would build all the water mills in the Middle Ages. And so it was very interesting, because then I kept thinking, what does it have to do with my work, and how does it relate? And I think that, to me, in this project, I was interested in the creation of this artificial landscape, and how it was man-made, and how man controlled nature for its own good. So it was very interesting to frame that, and to be able to work with this community and pursuing this kind of project. So I have some images, but maybe it's too late.
I think we slowly should close down, and I also think, like, what I see, like, much more there than in the sense of like a relational art as it's used today, that you also introduce the notion of alienation, like modernism also as a side effect of modernism, this notion of the alienation, and like that is like getting you away from the site where you are, and you rather are connected through the modernist movements, and by that really causing these non-sites, these alienated sites. And I think that is something I see very strongly in your installations. Also much more a notion of alienation rather than relation. I don't know if that's
yes, it's when I say indifference, for a certain period, I really like to come up with these concepts. In 95, when I started to work with the internet and think about it, I came up with this idea of the anesthetic body. Can I say that in English? Corpo anestésico. It's not anesthetized, but it's anestésico. And I felt the plane was a capsule like corpo anestésico. So the idea of numbing, the idea of these spaces that really are numbing the senses and your brain in a way became a focus. So I agree that alienation and indifference are pretty close, I think. Thank you.
There's one burning question in the back, and I think that's our closing question for Julian.
One question. It seems that part of what you were suggesting with this idea of incorporating the landscape into the interior has to do with the framing of the modern view to the exterior, Niemeyer and others. I was wondering in which ways it appears that there's a kind of a doubling of that, the intensity of the removal that you were talking about. There's a first removal from the landscape, which is kind of the modern, and a second removal from the landscape. That is what you've, at least what I see you're attempting to do. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but the question that comes to my mind is it possible to, you probably have thought about this, but how to think about the removal of that exteriority that happens outside by sequestering some kind of a space that happens with your mazes, for example, in the noisy atmosphere of São Paulo or Buenos Aires. How to transform, I'm asking this in light of what I see here. Is it possible to bring these arguments to the exterior?
To bring what?
This approach to making art to the exterior, to the outside, to the landscape, and transforming the landscape through these methods that you're using.
Oh, I don't know if I understand your question.
Well, let me try to clarify a bit more. It appears that you've part of the effort, especially in the Niemeyer projects, has to do with bringing or doubling the effect of the landscape in the interior of space, of architectural space. Is it possible to think about that exteriority and transform the exteriority, transform the landscape itself, not only by bringing it into the interior space, but actually working in the landscape or working outside?
Well, I think that in Niemeyer's building, it was all there. I think the landscape was already in. So by placing more mirrors, by capturing landscape inside, I was trying to make it, potentialize this experience, and also transforming the architecture itself in a platform, or in a maybe, I never thought of it, but in a structure to see outside. So the architecture as a machine to see. That's the relation that I was trying to make. As on the other hand, in Paulo Mendes da Rocha, there's no contact with real life. And this opposition is to me very interesting, that I had the same exhibition, but I displaced not only the art pieces, but also elements of architecture, and placed it again in a different architecture. And there was no contact. And the mirror was the landscape available, the only one. And of course, when that happens, when you don't have too much input, I guess one starts to look inside and search for the landscape. And then there is this exchange that is set, as opposed to Niemeyer. It was all there, but the trigger was the sound piece. That was the one that I was trying to bring in. So I don't know what is exterior. It's also a question of relation, no? What's inside, what's outside. So yeah, I think that's it.
I think it's always good to end with a question that keeps us moving.
Yeah.
So I want to quickly use the chance also to thank like Jack Young and Travis and Mary, Becca and Sam for making this evening happening. That also like will help us to make it visible to people who couldn't come tonight. It actually will be up on our blog like very soon. And I really want to thank Anna. Thank you so much for giving us your time again.
Okay, thank you.